Well, thank you very much for taking the time to look at this video. This is Paul Taubman with 9.connects. Today I'm going to talk about a thing that we call the contractors loop. And it's not just for contractors, there's other scenarios as well. But what we're trying to address here today are the issues that come up when you're trying to take a project into Concord Pro or Altium 365 and link up the components that you have in this project to either Altium Altium 365 or Concord Pro. Now, for the purposes of this video, what I'm going to show today, both Altium 365 and Concord Pro are both applicable. So if I just mention one and not the other, I'm not trying to single out one product from the other. They both work the same way, just that Concord Pro is on a private server and Altium 365 is on a cloud server. And so for those who are using Concord Pro, a lot of times you could get into what's called the contractors loop because you have a third party who's creating a design for you and they're not able to get access to that server. And so this would happen quite often with Concord Pro, not so much with Altium 365, assuming that the company has given that third party the option or the right to log in to their account, which they can do on the cloud. The other two scenarios that come up often are number one, rogue engineers or designers, and number two, those who are trying to take existing projects that were not created within the Altium 365 environment and are trying to get everything linked up. So when it comes to the quote-unquote rogue engineers and designers, it's not, it happens quite often, and it's not necessarily all their fault. They're trying to get their jobs done. They're getting thrown into a new environment which they're not familiar with. They don't have the time. And as a result, for them, in their mind, the pressure to get the job done it basically wins over what they would have to do in order to learn this. And so as a result, they basically say, well, I'll use what I've got right now, get the project done, and I'll deal with this later. And that's the problem, is when things come later, that's when you start dealing with the issues that we're going to talk about here today. So, and for those who are trying to take existing projects into Altium 365 or Concord Pro, my advice is leave well enough alone. I mean, you can bring them in, but don't try to fix all the components. I would wait for a revision change to do that. Otherwise, you're going to spend a lot of time cleaning up stuff. So with that being said, let's take a look at what we've got here on the screen right now. What I have done is I have taken the tutorial that Altium provides. It's the multi-vibrator project. And I drew it out and made a quick project out of it. There are some modifications to this for the experiments that I was running. So first off, even though everything came from either the miscellaneous devices or miscellaneous connector directories, I did make some modifications to them. So for example, if we take a look at this resistor over here, this along with all my other resistors and capacitors and components, I gave them all a part choice. And this is going to be very important because obviously if I'm going to try to relate this project to Concord Pro, and that's or Altium 365, which we're using in this example, if I want to relate it, I have to have something that's real to relate to. And so that's what I did over here. I did also make a minor modification. They asked for a 20 nanofarad capacitor here, through a hole one that I was looking for. They're very hard to find in the component search, so it was easier to find a 10 nanofarad capacitor, and so I just ran these in parallel. So there's a little bit of a change here in the design. Also did create the PCB dock here as well because I want to see if there's any impact to the footprints. So we've got that here. One of the things that I did as well to the library, and it has to do with the resistors, because I want to see what happened if we swapped out the components wholesale, which is what you do have to do when you're trying to reconcile this, is I create, let's put that back in there. Let's go back here and click on this library. So the library here, the miscellaneous devices has a resistor on here, but it's horizontal. I purposely made it vertical, and I also offset it as well because I wanted to see what the impact was. The library component that we have in our Altium 365 account is horizontal, has a different look to it, which you'll see here in a little bit, and I wanted to see what impact that was going to have. Okay. The other thing that we did as well, and this is important because ultimately I have to be able to synchronize or reconcile what I've got here in the project with what I've got in our account, the library account for Altium 365. What I had to do is make sure I had a parameter that it could relate to. So I'm going to go over here into Tools, Parameter Manager, and just to show this to you, I turned off everything else here. I'm strictly looking at the parts. And here in the parts, if we push this over a little bit, you'll see that there's a manufacturer and a manufacturer's part number that has been added in here. So when you do a part choice, they generally don't add the manufacturer part number in. They will add a supplier part number and a supplier name in, but they don't add this in here. But I needed this in order for me to associate between my library and what I've got here. So just keep that in mind. So with that being said, after we created this project here, I had to make sure that each and every single one of these components existed in our Altium 365 account. And just to show an example over here, I did search for this, and you can see that I have this capacitor in here. So I created it, and from there I also used the symbols and the footprints, not from the miscellaneous device library, but from the components, or pardon me, the symbols and footprints that we already had in our Altium 365 account. So as far as I know, the footprints and the symbols that we have in this account have no association whatsoever. They weren't copied. There's just nothing that relates them back to the Altium miscellaneous devices account there. Okay, so with that being said, what did we do here? Well, what we did was we took, after we finished this project here, put all of these components into Altium 365. I wanted to start reconciling this. Well, how do we reconcile this? Meaning, how do we get these components here to relate to the components that I now have in Concord Pro or in Altium 365? Here, what I did was you go into Tools and you go into Item Manager. So here's the Item Manager, and it tells you right away that these symbols that we have in this schematic are not managed. Okay, that's fine. So what we're going to do here is we're going to click under Options, because I need to set up a rule set so I can have it somehow figure out this relationship between what I've got in this schematic and what I have in my library. So I'm going to click on Options. Usually when you open this up, you're going to have a whole bunch of things it's trying to find a relationship to. I just removed those all by hitting the Remove button, and I created one that's called Manufacturer's Part Number. This over here on the top is just the title. This over here is to enable it, because if you have a bunch of these, you can enable them and disable them to your heart's content. And then over here is a drop-down based of all the parameters that you have of the components that are in your design. So if there's a parameter that exists there, it's going to be in this list. And so in this case here, I use the manufacturer part number. And notice again, I don't have the option here necessarily to use the part choice manufacturer's part number. These are all hard parameters, and that's what it's giving me the option to use. So that's why I had to add in the manufacturer's name and part number into these components prior to doing this. So there it is. Now on the server side, meaning the Altium 365 side, well, we have about 800 components in that library, and there's a lot of parameters, as you can see here. But one of the things it also has, which I do like, it says part choice is manufacturer part number, and I certainly want to use that one. So I found good success with this when testing this out on non-managed parts. There's another area over here which I would encourage you to take a look at. It is advanced, and so under the advanced over here you can tell which parameters you want to update, but more importantly what you want to do is library parameters that are not in your sheet you want to add, which is obviously we want to do because we're assuming that this Altium 365 library has a lot more information than what I might have in my project. But sheet parameters not in the library, I don't want them to be removed because it will actually remove my manufacturer name and manufacturer part number, as I've found in previous attempts at doing this. So I don't want those to be removed, and I'm going to press OK. And obviously there's other options here, but let's just focus on what we're trying to do here, which is reconcile in general. So I'm going to select on the first component. I'm going to hold down my Shift key and select the last one. I could also do a Control A as well. I'm going to right click here, and yes, you can choose manually, but that's a lot of work. I'm just going to auto match it based off the rule I created. So with this here, it does find them all, which is awesome. And now I want to ECO this because nothing happens until I ECO this. What I don't recommend you do is just blindly mash this button and accept it. You should look and apply, generate the ECO first to see what is going on. So you can see over here it's going to modify some values that already exist, and it's going to add in a bunch of parameters. This is good. I don't see anything that's being deleted. Now, I'm going to go through this twice. The first time I'm going to go through this, what I don't want this to do is to modify this, because this gets interesting and I want to talk about it in a moment. Right now, I'm just going to right click here and I'm going to say disable all the same kind. So all I'm looking for in this case is to just update the parametric information. I am going to execute the changes. You'll see here that there was no errors that were found. And here I didn't execute anything. I'm going to press close and I'm going to press close again. Oh, notice something here before I close out. These are not managed. I may have taken parametric information out of Altium 365, and I may have put those into my components, but I am not associated to those components. And that's because I didn't allow it to change out my graphics. And so there's no halfway point between, yes, I'm associated here, but no, I'm using my own graphics. Either you go the full you go the full way, or you just grab parametric data and you leave these things independent of the components that you have in your library. So how do we know this? Well, if we press close over here, one thing you'll notice here is that if I click on a component, it does not give me any status here. Normally there'll be a status here as to the file lifecycle scheme and even a little price over here as to how things are coming along, but I don't have this here. I do have a lot more parameters though, because all these great parameters are put in here because I asked it to put those in, but that's as far as I go with it. And it does preserve the schematic and it preserves the footprint. So if I go back over here to my PCB dock, you'll see that nothing has changed, and that's a good thing. Well, what if you actually want these components to be, hey, it's like, no, I want these associated to what I've got in my library, whether it's Concord Pro or Altium 365. Well, let's take a look and see what happens here, and this is where it gets kind of sticky. So we're again going to go into Tools, Item Manager. We don't need to make any changes to the options here because we're going to do the same search here. And here, just one little note, and I don't like this, it doesn't retain what you did the last time here, so make sure you change it to Do Not Remove. And I'm going to press OK here, as I have found in prior attempts at doing this. And you go ahead and press OK. I am going to, again, select these. This time I'll do a Control-A just to show that that works as well. And I'm going to auto-match it. And again, it should find everything here. Now, again, with the ECO, I want to generate it. And here, it recognizes the fact I already got the parametric data. So what it's asking to do is to replace the parts. Okay? And I'm going to execute the changes. All right, so when we execute the changes here and we press close, and we press close again, okay, this is where we have some issues. So you can see that it did replace each and every single one of these components, including these two over here, with the ones that were in the library. And these happen to match up in the Altium, in the Altium 365 library. Let me clarify that. They did match up over here. That's why these did not move. But our resistors moved, right? Because I told you I initially started off with a vertical orientation, and the one in our Altium 365 account is actually a horizontal orientation. And the same thing over here with our capacitors here as well. So it really turned us into a bit of hash. Now this is a pretty simple design. Can you imagine just doing this for 20 pages? I'd be pulling out my hair. So if this does happen to you, the first thing I'd immediately recommend you do is right-click here and close without saving. Now, does it impact the footprints? Well, initially, no, because in order to impact this, you would have to go into the schematic. So this is where you can get yourself into a real world of hurt here. If you didn't realize these things got moved around and you go into Design, Update the document, this should give you the warning that there's a lot of modifications going on here and that you want to look at this a little closer. Now I'm going to turn off the room and the component class is going to add, but I'm going to execute the changes here and you can just see what happens here. So remember, we changed out the symbol, and if we changed out the symbol, or actually the component in the schematic, we're also changing out the link to the footprint. So all these footprints came from our Altium 365 account as well. So we turned this into complete hash as well. So that's kind of the sticky point that you get into with something like this. If you create this project outside of Concord Pro or Altium 365, the best that you can do is pull in its parametric information. But if you want those components to actually have the same graphics and the same footprints, then you're going to end up with something that looks like this. And we don't really have a clean way of getting you out of this over here. So that's why it's important to understand this thing that we call the contractor's loop and to really try to avoid it unless you're okay with your designers using symbols and footprints that are outside those libraries for those existing projects. And in some cases, that may be fine with the understanding that new projects need to somehow be started in using the libraries that are available within these products. So hopefully you found this to be educational. If you like what you saw, please mash that like button down below. And hey, subscribe to us, because we're always trying to put out these videos to show you the best ways of dealing with your PCB design process.